jump in with a question here? When you're talking about the Ashkenazi Jews in their Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah prayers that they're praying to Yeshua, I was reading the scriptures yesterday and ran across something in the Old Testament that said salvation, and I thought, well, I'm going to go back and look at the interlinear.
That's the word.
And salvation was Yeshua.
There it is.
And so can you, when you're reading the Old Testament, every time now there are many Hebrew words that are translated salvation in the Old Testament. So they're not all Yeshua. So you have to go back and look at each one, because some of them are some other word, but many of them are Yeshua. And whenever I run into that particular Hebrew word, can I just replace that with Jesus?
Well, they even have it a broader, the Prince of the Presence, Yeshua Sar Hafanim, Metatron. I mean, these are all the angelic, Abraham, when he sat down with the angel of the Lord. Who was the angel of the Lord? He was the Messiah.
Jesus, right? Yeah.
And these apparitions of Jesus throughout the Old Testament is Judaism. And you don't understand. And when he appears as three, you have to understand he did the same thing on the Mount of Transfiguration. So you have the Spirit of the Lord, the Word of the Lord, and the Prophet of the Lord. This is Judaism. Now, Judaism has a Talmud, and there's Yeshua HaNatzri, and then there was Mary Magdalene's son, Ben Stadri, who have corrupted their understanding. But within the Ashkenazi rabbinical tradition, and here we go to Kabbalah. What does Kabbalah mean to you?
To me?
Yeah.
Well, I've heard.
How do you react when you hear that word?
Well, when I first started my channel, when I would hear Kabbalah, I would think, oh boy, this is scary stuff. We don't want to go there because, years ago, I had heard that it was some system of secret numbers, some Gnostic, secret truth that only certain people could know. And my own perspective of the faith is that even the simplest child or the person with the most severe mental handicap can understand the gospel. So they don't need to have some secret truth told to them. But then I began talking to people, and one of the lovely conversation partners I've had is this Jewish psychotherapist from Canada. And she talks about the Kabbalah being a way of looking at the underlying meaning of the words in the scripture. And that totally I understood, because there's so much depth in the words in scripture that those words grow in depth, not only synchronically, but diachronically through time. They grow in depth because of, I don't know why, but you can just dig down and down and down and down with every word and find new depths of meaning in these words. So I totally understand that aspect of Kabbalah.
Would it be analogous to doing the Mandelbrot set and seeing those fractals? It is.
A little bit, yeah.
And remember, Benoit Mandelbrot was an Ashkenazi Jew from Lithuania. Now, Kabbalah, very simple. All it means is theology, the received tradition. That's all it means in Judaism. And a student in the yeshiva cannot study it. As a yeshiva student in the Crown Heights tradition of Brooklyn, the Chabad Lubavitchers, they take the little boy, wrap him in a sack, and bring him to the yeshiva. I love that. So he doesn't see the world. And the Hasidics train him in the tradition of the Torah, and the Talmud and the Mishnah is very important, because the oral tradition in Judaism is essential. And the New Testament is essentially a Mishnaic work. Now, they cannot study the Kabbalah until they're 40. Now, does that make sense to you? And there's reasons for it, because you've explained it, because there is the dark side to it. And there's lots of illustrative event, and of course that depends a lot on their Maimonidean influences, because Maimonides wanted nothing to do with the Kabbalah. He was an over-rationalist. He was an anti-Kabbalist. However, because he did write the Mishnah Torah, he is studied. Now, that's a whole nother discussion in itself. But to put you at ease, as I've been put to ease over these last few years, that Kabbalah simply means theology for the Jew. It's the received tradition. That's all it means. And for someone not to study it after, before the age of 40 means something too. So that's very important there. Now, what you're talking about is gematria. Gematria is that every Hebrew letter has an ordinal number up to 1 through 10, and then it goes on the decimal, the 10, 20, 30, and very special numbers as the Hebrew alphabet has. And there are many people that are experts in the gematria, and that's not totally Kabbalah. Kabbalah is really the tree, and this is where I chimed in on your channel, because it's the Sephirah tree.
That's with the 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
and
I've been listening to a really fascinating series of lectures about that tree. Super good teacher. And he's
this
really
is where I chimed. Yeah, this is where I chimed in, because the fruit that Adam and Eve ate, and I ran this through my Jewish teacher, and he said, you're spot on. He says the dot is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they ate the fruit that is of the intellect and of the will, that one that's missing. And that basically is the Western tradition. And that's okay. I mean, we've analyzed it. That's why I look at someone like a Wolfgang Smith as the perfect describer. I mean, he's a better describer, and all these things are descriptions of truth, as mathematics, as all these great people you've interviewed in neurosciences, they describe things so beautifully. But the only prescription is, the Holy Scriptures as they've been given to us. Now, to understand that prescription as it's given to a Jew is different than it's given to a non-Jew. And that was sorted out in Acts chapter 15 in the Council of Jerusalem with the Noahide laws, because we have to understand there were two houses, the Judaizers, the Beit Shammai, and then the Beit Hillel during Jesus' time. And Jesus, what was he doing? He was taking on Beit Shammai. The Apostle Paul was Beit Shammai when he persecuted, but he kind of came back to his senses because his teacher Gamaliel was Beit Hillel. And these two schools at the time of Christ were the reason why, of course, so much of our Christianity going back now, we look at, well, Jesus hated the Jews, or Jesus was anti-Torah. No, he never said that. But he was anti a certain school. And in the book of Acts in 15, they had all kinds of things they would throw on. And of course, we know it was the circumcision issue at that point. But, Peter stands up and he says, why do you want to put this yoke on the Gentiles? And what is this yoke? It's not the yoke of following the law. It's not that a Jew hated to follow the law. They find pleasure to send their child to a yeshiva where they're just absorbing the Torah and then learning the Mishnah and the oral tradition. I mean, that's why they're chosen. They were given the oracles of God by a holy God. And we as Gentiles, and of course this brings in Esau, and that's a whole nother thing. They have the Torah of Esau. And see, Esau, he forfeited his birthright. He was chosen to be the priest, but he forfeited it. And of course, Abraham also had a son named Ishmael. And when Sarah died, he married her. Her name was then called Keturah. And so these traditions are very important because they give credence to what happened in the Middle East. And the reason I want to come to this point now is what accelerated my Judaism conviction is, when I took this assignment here in Italy, I'm here to work with refugees and Muslim immigrants. And so I've been studying Islam anew. And I'm studying Islam with a number of people. And they had this guest. And this guest kind of tied everything together for me, because it seems like in Islam, there's a lot of research now showing that there really wasn't a Muhammad, there wasn't a Mecca. These are things created 200 years later. And there's many different versions of the Quran. But I look at Muslims as having lived here in Europe as holier than I am. I mean, if they're practicing Islam, they're putting me to shame. And who am I to judge them in their submission? So I wanted to understand this. So God gave me the privilege of meeting a Shabbati Jewish. He used to be a secular Ashkenaz, and he's got a full scholarship from Cambridge. And he has this channel called Red Judaism. And he has to be incognito because he's got harams. He used to live in Israel, and it's been tremendous threat on his life and family. But he became he recited the Shahada, which is the Muslim confession, in his student union while he was at Cambridge as a student. So he became a Muslim. He was an Ashkenazi secular Jew. He was not circumcised. And he became a Muslim. But he had some good advice to look into some of these Gnostic type of sects. They're called the Paulicians, who ended up in the Bogomils. And these were kind of like forerunners of the Waldensians. We have them. Always these movements that were not part of the institutionalized church. They were fiercely persecuted. But he did his expertise on understanding the first 6 centuries. So he understood the Syriac lectionaries and all the materials that made up the Quran. He understood the Judeo-Hagarian context and also the Judeo-Arabic language. So that was his specialty. And he became a believer in the Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, through that research into the Quran. So, and then, of course, he came back to Judaism, and now, he was in Israel for a while, and he has this channel, and he's a very